Welcome into an edition of Cooler Talk presented by RTIC. I'm DP Sidhu. This is John Harris. I'm filling in. I haven't been on Cooler Talk in a while.
Yeah, where you been?
I don't know. I feel like, do I not get invited enough? Or it's just, like
Listen,
today was my day.
Let me tell you how Cooler Talk goes. It's there's an email that goes out, and it's like my name in the two, and then everybody else gets CC'd, and then some people get BCC'd, and it's like, are you doing Cooler Talk today, John? And if I'm not doing it, then, well,
I got called up to the active roster this time. Usually I'm a P squad player. Johnny is a bona fide starter. He's the quarterback. He's going to let me quarterback today because he'd like to stay off the ball today, which you get plenty of reps on Texans All Access.
Yeah, I like that. I've always told Mark, he said whenever I'm doing the show with you or with DP or whomever, I like to be off the ball, sort of not like James Harden. That's not a great example, but more like Klay Thompson. I like being kind of the Klay Thompson. I move around, look for my spots, and then just drop threes from all over the place.
I will feed you the ball whenever you need
that.
it. Speaking of which, if you've got questions for John Harris or myself, please start putting them right here below, and I will try to get them up as much as possible. Johnny, you ready to get into some questions?
Yeah, I think we're probably going to get more questions now than maybe we even got during the season because is Kiki QT active and healthy? Is Deontay Foreman going to play today? I don't think we're going to get those questions.
I don't think we're going to miss those. I'm going to miss those questions.
I don't think. So we'll get some other ones. Maybe we'll get those over and over again, but
yeah,
I imagine there'll be one in particular we'll get. It might be this first question we get.
Yeah, I was going to say the offseason brings its own questions, and a lot of news broke down this week, and then we've got, players and their statuses. So let's get into probably the most popular question. Tina wants to know, what is Jadeveon Clowney's status this offseason?
Well,
get out your crystal ball, Johnny.
Yeah,
what's going to happen with 90?
Well, Right now, he's still a member of the Texans because the league year doesn't end until March 9th, I think it is, which will help us with the second question. But March 9th, I think, is the end of the league year.
Yes.
Once the new league year kicks in, that's when you start seeing – and a lot of people will say, when does free agency start? That's the same time that the league year ends and the new league year begins, and that's how they figure it out. But it's about March 9th, and that's when we'll know. The Texans have a number of different options available. There's the franchise tag option. There's a long-term contract.
March 13th.
March 13th. So the tampering period starts, I believe.
Yes.
Legal
tampering.
Tampering period, which one of the funniest tampering moments happened last night. I don't know if you saw this with the NBA draft with LeBron and with Giannis. It was hilarious. But either way, back to Jadeveon.
Makes me anxious for our free agency.
Yeah, it does. But to that end, Jadeveon's still a Texan up until that point, so he's going to be an unrestricted free agent unless something happens. Now, if the Texans choose to place the franchise tag on him, he doesn't have to sign it. It's not as if he can just, as soon as he gives it, okay, you sign it, you go. Some people will do that. Some people do that because there's a thought that they'll then be traded or moved on at that point. But some people, like Le'Veon Bell, held on to his and decided, no, I'm not signing it again. Now, that was the second time for him. So there are still some things that have got to be worked out. At the end of the year, we heard, I think it was Ian Rappaport, had said the Texans were planning on bringing Jadeveon Clowney back in addition to Tyrann Mathieu. I would love to have both of them back. There's no question. But, look, this is the business side of things. And Jadeveon and the team got to come to an agreement about what the value is supposed to be for a contract going forward, the number of years, the bonus money, all that kind of stuff. It's probably one of the harder things to do for an organization to figure out where that player is going to fit financially, and not just for that year, but for going forward as well, for the future as well. So, look, Jadeveon, I think, has been fantastic the last 3 years when he has been on the field for 16 games. But it's just a matter of now the business side gets involved, and hopefully the business side, football side all match up, and we can bring number 90 back here next year and beyond.
I think Brian Gaine also, this is us getting to know Brian Gaine as a general manager. It's just his second year. I know before this, we did not have a habit of, signing guys.
Yeah.
With that extra, with the extra year, with the option. But with Rick Smith, that is, we only did it with Dante Robinson.
Yeah, I think he was one, and then JJ they did 2 years ahead of when his contract
but his contract was finalized. So with Jadeveon, we'll see.
As far as franchise tag,
sorry.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. With the franchise tag,
I think Dante's the only one that I can remember getting it.
In recent history, just him, and since I've been here, we've not signed anyone. So we kind of always knew we don't franchise tag players. That's just not what we do. But it'll be interesting now with Brian Gaine and with Jadeveon Clowney, with how much he's worth and with all the other salary cap issues. How is that going to figure out for him? So we'll continue to keep our eye on it. But I have a feeling, I feel like they're going to bring him back. That's just my personal opinion. opinion, because I just think it's hard to come up with pass rushers, and I think the more pass rushers you have, the better. And he's done a phenomenal job. He's proven that he can stay healthy on the field. I'm going to get to the next question. We kind of already addressed it. When does free agency start? March 13th is the league year. What is it, midnight?
Yeah, I think it's midnight, March 13th. The legal tampering period leads up until that point. So I think it's like the 10th through the 13th or 11th through the 13th, maybe.
11th through the 13th, clubs are permitted to contact and enter into contract negotiations with the players. That's the legal tampering period and restricted free agents. And then prior to 4 p.m. Eastern time, 3 o'clock our time, the clubs must exercise options for 2019 on all the players. That's March 13th. So then 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock our time, March 13th, begins the new NFL Happy New Year gifts that we love to see.
And so here's kind of how the rest of the next couple of months will go. You're going to have the combine, which I believe is the 26th or 27th, and that'll lead you into that week. I think it's the 3rd or 4th it ends, something like that. And that tampering period starts the 11th through the 13th. So you basically have a week between when the combine is finished and that legal tampering period begins. Now, you can negotiate with your guys. Like if Jadeveon walked in here today and said, I'm going to go sign a contract, they can do that. They can sign a long-term contract. But you know how things are. Deadlines spur action.
I look like I don't have any hands when I sit like this. I'm going to take my hands out of my pocket.
There you go.
Continue.
But we'll find out. And he's not the only one. The Texans have got, I think, probably about 15 to 18 players that are unrestricted free agents. A lot of names you know: Kareem Jackson, Tyrann Mathieu, Jadeveon Clowney, Kendall Lamb. Those are all guys that they're going to have to make a decision on going forward. So that'll start to happen. Christian Covington, that'll start to happen hopefully pretty soon. When you see a player around the building at this point of the year, you can kind of go, ooh, that's a good sign. That's a good thing, hopefully, as long as they're not rehabbing.
Seen a few of them, too.
You don't have a lot of guys that are rehabbing this offseason from significant injuries, so that's pretty much a good thing.
All right, here's another popular question. Joel wants to know, is Le'Veon Bell a possibility?
No.
I've heard a lot. This seems to be a popular sports radio topic that I hear from time to time. I agree with you. I just don't think he's a possibility. I think the O-line and re-signing your guys is going to be the bigger issue right now. To spend money on a guy outside that's obviously had issues, getting things worked out with Steelers, whatever those issues may be.
Yeah.
I just don't think that would be a priority, and it just doesn't seem to fit within the personality of this team. But hey, I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just going off of my gut feel as to how things work around here.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and that's why I just said no. I think Le'Veon Bell is a possibility because money-wise, the Texans could make it work because salary cap-wise, they've got some room. But to your point, they're going to have to sign Jadeveon Clowney. They're going to have to sign Tyrann Mathieu, hopefully Kareem Jackson. They're going to have to sign these guys. So the guys they already have on campus, so to speak, are going to get that money. And if they're going to spend money, I think, like you said, what are the priorities for this team going forward? I think it's to patch up the outside of the secondary, and I think it's the offensive line. And depending on how they're going to put that together, look, they reconfigured 80% of the offensive line last year. Hopefully, it's not as much, but there's still some work that needs to be done, especially for an offense that gave up 62 sacks. And that's not all on the offensive line, but that unit's got to get better. And you can see what that meant. Offensive line improvement. You can see what happened in Indianapolis when they added some pieces to it and got things right. All of a sudden, that offensive line was one of the best in the league, if not the best in the league. And it took 1 year. So it can happen. The Texans just got to get that right. If they do, this offense could be pretty much unstoppable.
More on offensive line coming up. I see some more questions coming in. But Dennis wants to know, do you think there will be a difference in play calling with Tim Kelly? Tim Kelly he came in as an offensive quality control guy, moved up to the tight ends coach. Now he's the offensive coordinator. Yep. I saw him. I was walking to the cafeteria the other day, and I saw him, and I congratulated him. And I said, so you going to celebrate? And he laughed at me. He laughed. Right. I think the celebrating part is just going to be more work, but, he was a quality control guy, so he's used to that. I know you guys talked to Bill O'Brien about this, and he was sort of nebulous in his answer, but I feel like the way I interpreted that was Bill's still going to call plays when he's got a system in place, and when he feels like he's ready to sort of shift some of that play calling. Like it's going to be, he used the word collaborative a lot. Mm-hmm. If it's probably not totally going to be Tim Kelly calling the plays, but it could be a combination of mostly Bill to mostly Bill, some Tim to like half and half, and then I don't know if we ever get to just Tim Kelly calling plays, but I think it is going to be a little bit of everything to start things off. Is that a good way to phrase it?
Yeah, and you hit it right at the end to start things off. What they do in week 1 may not be what they do in week 17. That may not be the way they're doing it. What they do in week 5 might not be what they're doing in week 8. I think it's going to be something where they've got to feel their way through the process. And Bill O'Brien gets to a comfortability level with Tim Kelly, that might be when he sort of hands that over. It's a huge responsibility when you talk to coordinators, young guys especially, throughout the league, and they realize, wow, there's a lot that goes into preparing for a game, calling all those plays. So I think, and be ready for anything and everything that you could possibly see. And I would imagine Bill O'Brien's not going to be real happy if he turns it over to a play caller and that guy's seeing something, whoa, I don't know how to handle that, and that's not going to sit well. So I think it's going to be kind of a work in progress till – and we've seen that here in Houston. And we've seen exactly what you outlined earlier when Gary Kubiak and Kyle Shanahan were together. Kyle didn't call the plays at first, and then Gary let him call some of the plays, but then Gary would take it back at certain points. And then Kyle finally said, look, give it to me or not. Like, one or the other. And then Kyle Shanahan ended up being the guy calling all the plays for an offense that was one of the best in the league. So I don't know if Tim Kelly will get to that point. We don't know. You're right. I think nebulous is probably the right word, but it was probably for a reason. I don't know that he's 100% certain how he wants to go about doing it, but I would imagine that there's a plan going forward for what he expects to happen with that position, if that makes sense.
I think it can't hurt because Bill O'Brien went from being head coach and offensive coordinator to now just being the head coach. He's brought in Doug West, who was in charge of football operations, to also be his assistant, and then he's got Tim Kelly. So I think that now, even if Bill is calling plays, there's less on his plate. What are the side dishes on his plate is he handing over? I don't know. I think play calling is sort of like the entree. He's probably going to keep the entree and maybe feather out some of the other things, but it'll be a little bit less on his plate dealing with in 2019.
One of the things that head coaches have the hardest time doing is getting away from calling ball plays. That's one of the
That's probably their favorite thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one football thing you get to do. When you have to handle everything else and team management and all that kind of stuff, you want to call the ball plays. That's the one thing you want to do. It's the one thing that kind of keeps you normal. It's the one reason you sort of got into football in the first place. And all of a sudden, you're going to give that up? That's not the easiest thing in the world.
All right, next question. Kathleen, do you see the Texans signing offensive linemen? And I'm going to take your question even further, Kathleen. Are there any free agents out there, Johnny? Have you had a chance to look at them that you think?
That's a great point, and that kind of leads me to my point, and that is.
Yeah, because I've seen a few, but I don't know how many. I mean, I think most teams.
Here's the second part of that question.
You got to know what they're going to do.
Here's the second part of the question I think Kathleen would like to ask: is there anybody worth signing? That's the biggest question. Is there anybody worth signing as an offensive lineman?
Well, it depends on how much you're.
No. It's not even depends. No.
Because I have one
for you. Is there anybody worth signing? That's the question. Now, when you ask that, you're hoping that you've got 4 or 5 guys that are worth signing. The one guy that I think would make some sense to take a look at is Trent Brown from the New England Patriots. That's the one guy I think it would make a lot of sense to look at because he's going to know the verbiage, and he is a massive, massive guy. And I remember seeing Trent Brown at the Senior Bowl. He went down there and he forgot all his equipment, and they had him in this big white helmet. He's a Florida Gator, and it wasn't an orange helmet. It was weird. And I just never felt like Trent Brown. I was like, that's just a bad way to start. He just doesn't look like an NFL lineman, and that guy has turned into a really good left tackle for the New England Patriots. But that is really about the only one that I could see being worth. And I'm not talking about paying him $15 million a year like the Giants paid Nate Solder. I think Trent isn't quite the player that Nate Solder is, but he definitely, I don't know, maybe he's going to want $15 million. Maybe he thinks he's in that ballpark. I don't know. But I just don't see any of the offensive tackles in particular that I look at it and go, yeah, we got to have that guy. Last year I felt about Nate Solder, like if the price is right, then okay. When I got to $15 million a year, I was like, nah, let's move on. So that to me is the question.
I think they would have if the price was right, but I think that's going to be the big.
But $15 million a year, he isn't worth $15 million a year. That's the tough part when you get to free agency.
I mean,
if you have to rely on free agency, you're relying on guys that are probably not going to give you the value of what you're going to pay for them.
All right, there's a lot of guys ahead of him as far as money-wise what they're owned.
Who cares? Gerald Veldheer, forget it. Ty Nsekhe is 33 years old. Cameron Fleming has never been a starter. Ben Angelano, forget about it. Cedric Ogbuehi was a first-round draft pick. Juwan James might be, but he's going to want to get paid. He was a former first-rounder. I don't think he's worth it. Brent Qualley, J.J. Watt made him his you-know-what. Jordan Mills with Buffalo, he struggled against our guys. Byron Bell has not been able to block anybody since he came in the league. Donovan Smith did play for Bill O'Brien at Penn State. He's an interesting guy. At 26, he's somebody that maybe I could think about. Like Adrian Waddle has never been really a starter. Marshall Newhouse is done.
And Tampa Bay, they got a new coach.
Jake Fisher might just move back to a big tight end spot. Jermon Bushrod, I would consider 5 years ago. Bobby Hart, Ty Sambrailo, nope. Chris Clark, done that already. Sam Youngs, nope. Austin Howard is one that people have had opportunities. So my point is I'm bringing all these guys up.
Those are your top tier ones right there.
That's the money they're being paid, and they're being paid that for a reason. Now, the one that's kind of interesting.
All right, wait, can we go back to –
here's the interesting one.
Yeah, who?
Is Ty Nseki from Washington. He did a really good job against our pass rushers for Washington. But the problem is he's 33 years old. So I don't know how much more he's going to have, but he had to replace Trent Williamson. I thought he did a decent job against the Texans pass rushers. And we know that if you put that on film against our guys – we've seen over the years that matters to this personnel staff and to the people in the building.
How about this? Donovan, I like this.
Donovan Smith is an interesting one.
That's intriguing to me now.
I don't think that he is ultimately the type of player like Trent Brown is for the New England Patriots, but I do think that Donovan Smith would be one of the options.
He's pretty young, too.
Yeah, so. You just don't have a ton of options at tackle in particular, and you're gonna have to pay for that. You're going to have to pay for that. So we'll continue on.
We just had a primer on free agent tackles just there. That was amazing. Yeah. All right, Joshua says, will Tyrann Mathieu be back?
Hope so.
I hope so too. He was tweeting out a few things that he bet on himself and things were working out. I don't know if that means it worked out here or if it worked out somewhere else. I hope it means
it can't work out anywhere else.
It can't work out anywhere else. So I'm assuming it means here. But anyway, fingers crossed. Everyone really liked what he was, what he brought to the locker room, and it'd be great if things worked out with him here. So. Keep an eye on that. Ivan says, who do you think we will take with the 23rd pick?
Well, when you ask that question at this point, or any point really, it's more about the position. And really, to me, it comes down to how the draft board falls out. I think what would be kind of nice on draft night in the first round in particular is if you start seeing the quarterbacks. Kyler Murray definitely goes. There's a run on quarterbacks. Daniel Jones from Duke and Drew Lock and Dwayne Haskins, and there's this run on quarterbacks. Everybody feels like they've got to get one. That would be kind of nice because that's going to push some of those offensive linemen on down to the Texans, which is kind of nice. But it also could push some corners down to the Texans. I think this is a pretty good corner draft. Greedy Williams from LSU, I think, is probably the better one. The best one, DeAndre Baker from out of Georgia. I like Lonnie Johnson from out of Kentucky. I think he is a definite player. Byron Murphy is not the kind of guy I don't think that we would look at. He's a little shorter, a little smaller than some of the corners, but, man, you talk about a good football player. So I think the way the board falls out at 23, the question becomes, all right, there's a litany of corners still on the board, or do we stretch and take the 5th or 6th tackle on our board? That could come up, just because you got to have that particular position. So I think you kind of let the board fall out the way it is, and if it looks like there's still some tackles on the board, there are a couple of them that look good, that's probably, to me, where you're going to go. But some of this is going to be determined by free agency, too.
Yeah.
You got in free agency and you can find a corner or two, or you find an offensive lineman or two, that's going to end up potentially changing what you do at 23. But look, people aren't dumb. People aren't stupid. You can ask anybody around the league. It's going to be on the offensive line, or it's going to be a corner. I think those are the two positions. If it's anywhere else, it's going to be a huge shock on Thursday night, draft night.
All right, with that being said, so in a total vacuum, is this draft class deeper at corner, or is it deeper at tackle?
Well,
I know your Harris 100 is coming out.
Yeah, it's coming out. I've been working on it. I actually watched tackles today. I think, to put it this way, I think there are more first-round draftable tackles in this draft than last year's draft. Last year, you had Mike McGlinchey. I didn't even have him I didn't even give him a first-round grade. I don't even know. I don't know that I gave an offensive tackle a first-round grade.
And he went early.
I don't care. That doesn't. I don't care where he went. But to your point,
it's supply and demand, right? Because there weren't very many.
That's exactly why Mike McGlinchey won the top 10.
Right
now, if we'd had a first-round pick and Mike McGlinchey was on the board, I would have said, yeah, it's a good thing to go get him, because left tackles, or just tackles in particular, there's
hard to come by.
Yeah, they're hard to come by. They're hard to find. This year's draft, though, at the offensive line, I think is much better. You got Jonah Williams from Alabama. You got Greg Little from Ole Miss. You got Andre Dillard from Washington State, who I talked with and I love. You got Cody Ford at Oklahoma, who probably is going to go into guard. You got Juwan Taylor from Florida, who a buddy of mine coached in high school at Cocoa High School in Florida. Those tackles, all of them, I would have taken in front of McGlinchey last year.
If McGlinchey was in this class year.
Colton Miller went in the middle of the round last year because the Raiders needed a left tackle. Mm-hmm. They needed a left tackle, and they went and got Colton Miller. I take all those guys. maybe not take all of them in front of McGlinchey, but I would take all of them in front of Colton Miller. They all would have been no worse than number 2. That's including Ford, who I think ends up playing guard. So I think there are definitely some options at tackle. I think there are options at tackle in later rounds, too, if they want to double up. If they want to go and just say, look, we're throwing as many draft resources as possible. You know, a guy like Oli Udoh from Elon, who is massive. You know, a guy like Titus Howard from Alabama State, a couple of FCS guys that were very, very talented. I saw down at the Senior Bowl. Max Sharping, who played at Northern Illinois. There are a lot more names that I can rattle off this year that I've watched and guys that I've watched where I go, yeah, I could see him playing for us. I could see him fitting for us. Whereas last year I was like, no, thank you.
All right.
No, thank you.
All right. It'll be interesting to watch. Johnny, Frankie says, will the team add receivers due to injury concerns with Fuller and QT? Now, Fuller obviously had the ACL, and then QT with the hamstring that he never really had a lot of time to recover from. He would sit out for 4 or 5 games and come back for a few.
Yep.
I know he said he was going to get it right this offseason. He never had hamstring issues during his time at Texas Tech. Right. And then Will Fuller is just different injuries every year. I think an ACL is just something that could sort of happen to anybody.
Yep.
But any concern that you're going to need to draft somebody else just to add depth there? Obviously, with Demaryius Thomas, you know that for a guy like him to work his way back from Achilles is going to be tough. So.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it with Demaryius, I'm in my mind, I'm not really considering him for the beginning of the year. Now, What happens later on as he gets ready? I mean, this happened in we played Philadelphia December 22nd, something like that, 23rd. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's almost as late an injury as you can have. So, I'm not even really counting on Demaryius, which I think is tough because had you had Demaryius with Fuller and QT coming back, with DeAndre, you would have felt like, boy,
right,
pretty salty. I wouldn't be surprised. This is a fairly deep receiver draft. Will you go out and will you get a veteran wide receiver? Potentially. But I don't know that there are any veteran wide receivers where I go, yeah, I could see that guy. I mean, because if you're going to add a veteran wide receiver, then and because you think there are going to be some issues with Fuller and QT, then you got to think that veteran wide receiver could be a number 2. You know what I'm saying?
He could be, but then he also opens himself up to injuries too because he's been around the. I don't know. I mean, depends on who the guy is.
Yeah, and that's the
is
thing.
A veteran guy going to want to come in here and be a number 2?
That's why I think there are a number of options if you're going to go that particular route. I think the options at receiver are fairly deep. I don't think there are any. There are probably some late first-round receivers. From that standpoint, there's no Calvin Johnson or Andre Johnson. There's nobody of that caliber. Larry Fitzgerald, some of you are drafting in the top 3 or 4 of the draft. I don't think there's anybody like that. But there are – the receivers now in college are, what'd Forrest Gump say, like a box of chocolates? You open it up, you don't really know what you're going to get because you got big guys playing the slot. You got little guys playing the slot. You got big guys that can't run but catch the ball really well on the outside. You got guys that can absolutely fly on the outside but don't catch the ball real well. So you got a combination of a lot of different things. I think I wouldn't be surprised if the Texans added a weapon on the offensive side during the draft. I'm just totally convinced that it would be a wide receiver.
Because if you think about it, you got to assume they're all going to come back healthy. So if you've got a healthy Hopkins, healthy Will Fuller, healthy Kiki QT,
those guys are playing. Those are your 3 guys.
That's a pretty stacked. Yeah, those are the guys that are going to
play.
But
it's a big if whether they come back healthy.
Wouldn't you assume they're going? Because none of them have any injuries that would say otherwise.
Well, I mean, Fuller coming off an ACL. With an ACL being a wide receiver, a little different. But it did happen. What happened in October? I think it happened near at the same time for Deshaun. But just a little different because that's a guy that does rely on his speed to get open and do those things. So there's probably a little concern with that. And then I would imagine with Will, there's probably not a lot you can do in mini camps and OTAs and those kind of things. So you obviously have got to have somebody to be able to do that. But look, Vincent Smith making that jump from year 1 to year 2. I mean, it would be fantastic to see him do that.
Right.
But I don't know that you're going to rely on that completely. So would they add some receivers? I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised to see Jester Weah coming off injured reserve be a factor somehow in all this. But a veteran receiver, I don't know about that. I'm not totally convinced that from an offensive weapon standpoint, receivers, tight ends, running backs, hybrids, whatever, however you want to call it, I wouldn't be surprised if there is somebody added in that realm because there's a lot of very intriguing offensive weapons, I'll say it that way, coming from the draft.
Okay.
Looking forward to that.
I got one more question for you, Johnny. Josh says, what do you know about the new quarterbacks coach?
Well, you can speak to that a little
Carl
better.
Smith.
You studied what Carl Smith did. Man, he's been with a lot of different quarterbacks.
I know. And you know what?
It's successful ones, too.
Big successful. The fact that he was able to be with Russell Wilson the entirety of his career at Seattle is super impressive, considering the similarities between Wilson and Deshaun Watson and how he was able to get the most out of him. And Wilson still had a phenomenal year last year. He was at the Pro Bowl as well. And maybe, it's been a while since we've seen that sort of production out of him. So he seems to be able to coach that out of guys. He's been with Pete Carroll at USC there. He was in New England with Pete Carroll. So there's the New England connection that we see sort of pop up with some of our assistant coaches. He's Tracy Smith's dad, Tracy Smith, assistant special teams coordinator. And I read somewhere that his nickname was Tater. That's what Russell Wilson called him. So that's what I know about him.
That's interesting.
But, you can give your more detailed synopsis of him.
I think Carl is 71, 72. He's been around. He's got skins on the wall. I mean, like you said, Russell Wilson, he was Matt Leinart's quarterback coach in 2004 when Matt Leinart won the Heisman Trophy at USC. He's got a lot of connection with Pete Carroll. So, I mean, he's been with Pete in a lot of different places, the Jets, the Patriots, USC, Seattle last few years. And so some people have asked me, well, why would you move? Well, you have an opportunity to mold a young quarterback here. Not that you couldn't continue to do that in Seattle, but Seattle changed offensive coordinators last year, and who knows what that does to the offensive coaching dynamic. But also, I think the other part of this is, Tracy probably looks, or Carl probably looks at it and says, how many more years am I going to coach? This is an opportunity to go coach with my son.
Yeah, that's a hard opportunity to pass up.
It's a football decision that is made maybe with football out of it, the fact that you get to coach with your son. I mean, I think about that. I mean, my son, I'm never going to coach with my son because my son doesn't care for football or anything like that, but I always thought about my dad. Would I ever coach with my dad? Would I want to coach with my dad? And I always said if I became a head coach somewhere, high school or college somewhere, I'd want my dad somewhere a part of my staff because that's one person beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can trust more than anybody else. And he's the one guy. And so, look, one will be with special teams, one will be with offense and spending his time with Deshaun Watson. But I just think having that shared experience together, no matter when it happens in your life, I think is pretty cool. And I think that was probably a decent part of the equation for Carl.
Considering how many hours the coaches spend in this building and how much time they spend together, it's nice to be able to do it with your family if it's possible, because it's not.
If that's the way you do it, if that's the way that you can do it, you'll take it.
Why not? Why not?
Take it.
All right, Johnny, I love spending time with you every Friday, so have me back. I'll be happy to,
Yeah, I
keep you off
wouldn't
the ball
mind doing cooler talk with you more often, DP, to be honest.
Well, you can
that
hear
other
John,
guy we do it with. He's
him. He's walking around here as well. Anyway, you can always hear Mark Vandermeer, John Harris, myself, Drew Doherty. Texans All Access is back. It was back this week, 6 to 7 p.m. on Sports Radio 610. Also, our Texans podcast.
Ooh, yeah.
They're still coming strong. In fact, I got to go put up this week's Deep Slant because I've got all the interviews from the blue carpet, the Houston Sports Awards.
That was fun.
And we asked a few football questions, some about these new coaching changes, so you're going to want to check that out. Texans 360 on Saturday nights on ABC. Check that out. And as always, thank you so much, Johnny.
Thank you, DP. That was great.
Cooler Talk presented by RTIC. Thank you so much for your questions. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back next Friday. Go Texans.